Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. In this column, the writer evaluates the latest phase of political instability that Nepal witnessed, along with its implications for India. See, since the 1970s, Nepal has witnessed long periods of political instability, and during many of these instances, Nepal's politicians and Nepal's political parties have blamed India and its intelligence agencies for allegedly interfering in the internal affairs of Nepal. For example, look at India's unofficial economic blockade on Nepal in 1989, which crippled the Nepali economy as Nepal is very dependent on India because Nepal being a landlocked country, it is directly dependent on India for access to the sea. This unofficial economic blockade along the India-Nepal border reportedly came as a result of Nepal's increasing closeness with China with regard to diplomatic and defense relations. This unofficial economic blockade crippled Nepal's economy and it eventually forced Nepal to introduce multi-party politics as well, which until then was dominated by the rule of the monarchy. So within Nepal, India was blamed for such coercive diplomacy, while India clearly rejected these allegations, but it ended up creating a base for anti-India sentiments in Nepal. Then through the 1990s and early 2000, as Nepal descended into a civil war, which was triggered by the Maoists, India was again accused within Nepal of taking sides in this conflict, and it was allegedly blamed for backing both the Maoists and as well as the Nepali government and the Nepali army in the pursuit of its geopolitical interests. So, such allegations of India's role in interfering in the internal affairs of Nepal has always contributed to rising anti India sentiments in the country. But, however, one needs to remember that India did play a key role in bringing the civil war to an end and in restoring normalcy to Nepal. As the civil war ended, India ensured that Nepal successfully transitioned from a monarchy into a full fledged democratic state, along with transitioning from a theological state to a secular republic. Following this transition, Nepal began the process of drafting its constitution, but this constitution making process dragged on for several years between 2008 and 2015, and throughout this period, Nepal constantly witnessed political instability as several governments fell and several new governments were formed, and as several prime ministers and presidents came and went. But throughout this constitution drafting process, India was constantly blamed within Nepal for interfering in the sovereign process of constitution drafting, and this further led to the spread of strong anti India sentiments in Nepal. Then, upon this, the traditional diplomatic support that India has extended to the Madhesi community has also invited a backlash within Nepal, and it has been one of the grounds on which anti India sentiments have been built up in Nepal. The Madhesis of the Terai belt, they share close familial relations with border villages in UP and Bihar along the India-Nepal border. This community has constantly felt oppressed by the political elite of Nepal, and India has often stood up for the cause of the Madhesis. So for this, India gets blamed for carrying out excessive interference in the internal affairs of Nepal, and based on this, strong anti-India sentiments are promoted by certain Nepali politicians and Nepali political parties, and they end up building a political base for themselves based on Nepali nationalism. While India has rejected all these allegations, many former diplomats and even strategic experts agree that India has often excessively interfered in the internal affairs of Nepal, and even though some of them have been with the right intention, it has ended up compromising India's image within Nepal, which creates a fertile ground for radical politicians to thrive by promoting anti India sentiments and by claiming to champion Nepali nationalism. The outcome of such Nepali nationalism and anti India sentiments is controversial politicians such as KP Oli, who until recently was the Prime Minister of Nepal. By 2015, KP Oli rose to prominence by whipping up anti India sentiments and by championing the so called Nepali nationalism. The latest political crisis that Nepal witnessed has been attributed to the controversial policies of KP Oli, And considering how such leaders have subverted Nepal's constitution, the writer is calling upon India to be more mindful of its role in Nepal and not conduct its relations with Nepal entirely through intelligence agencies, but instead engage in official bilateral diplomacy and seek to promote the historical people to people relations between the two countries. See, the latest political instability that Nepal witnessed had nothing to do with India directly. A few months back, the then Prime Minister KP Oli, he asked the president to dissolve the Nepali parliament in a very controversial manner, and it was seen to be an unconstitutional step. But the president, who was seen to be working in tandem with the prime minister, concurred with the advice of the prime minister and decided to dissolve the Nepali parliament and called for fresh elections. Experts saw this as a move to further consolidate the political base of KP Oli, and it was felt that the Nepali parliament was unconstitutionally dissolved just for the sake of holding fresh elections, so that KP Oli can move out of the coalition government and win back power with a complete majority. But a few days back, the Supreme Court of Nepal has dealt a severe blow to KP Oli by calling all these decisions unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court of Nepal has ordered the reinstatement of the Nepali parliament. Along with this, the Supreme Court has reminded the president of her constitutional role and also called upon the president to appoint a new prime minister who had sufficient backing within the parliament. So it was only after the Supreme Court's intervention that KP Oli finally stepped aside and the president accepted the recommendation of the Supreme Court, and Sher Bahadur Deuba has been appointed as the new Prime Minister of Nepal. So while this brings Nepal's political crisis to an end, at least for now, it does raise the question as to how politicians like KP Oli have built up a controversial base for themselves by capitalizing on the strong anti-India sentiments in the country. Hence, the writer says that there is a lesson in this for the Indian diplomacy, that instead of being seen to be excessively involved in the internal affairs of Nepal, especially through intelligence agencies, it would be better for India to focus more on official bilateral ties, as the two countries have achieved a lot in the past through the official diplomatic route itself. The two countries share very close people to people relations and as well as historical civilizational relations, and India would do well to build upon this strong base. See, apart from these controversial episodes and apart from these phases of political instability, India and Nepal actually enjoy very close relations. This close relationship is based upon the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which provided for the establishment of open borders between the two countries, along with the provision of extending national treatment to the citizens of both the countries. So, as per the treaty, the India-Nepal border is an open border and there are no border controls or border restrictions, which provides for the free movement of people and goods. This not only helps Nepal overcome its geographical weakness of being a landlocked country, but it also helps strengthen the age-old people-to-people relations between the two countries. It helps strengthen the civilizational connection between India and Nepal offered through Hinduism and Buddhism, and it also helps bring communities such as the Madhesis closer to India. Both the countries also extend national treatment to the citizens of each other's country, thereby providing enormous benefits to Nepali students and Nepali workers in India, and also brings a lot of benefits for Indian investors and Indian businesses in Nepal. Upon this, India has been a very important development partner for Nepal, and India has invested heavily in the country with regard to development assistance. India has invested in the creation of essential infrastructure and also helps Nepal with regard to its defense and border security. India not only supplies weapons to the Nepali armed forces, but also helps Nepal in guarding against the threat posed by China. And in return, Nepal acts as a buffer state for India for securing its geopolitical interests vis-a-vis China. Even as Chinese influence is growing in the country of late, India still continues to remain a key player in Nepal because India is an indispensable partner for Nepal. Even in areas such as disaster management, environment conservation, and even with regard to electricity and pandemic management, India has been a key indispensable partner for Nepal. So according to the writer, there is a lot more that India and Nepal could achieve by focusing on their official bilateral ties and by seeking to promote their strong people to people relations. The writer says that if Nepal has to be politically stabilized, then anti India sentiments have to be cut, because it is on this basis that controversial politicians like KP Oli have risen to power. It was leaders like KP Oli who triggered the unnecessary border dispute between the two countries last year, and it was KP Oli who raked up the age old Kalapani and Susta dispute in order to further strengthen his image against India and in order to build up his Nepali nationalist political base. So, if the political base for such controversial leaders has to be cut, and if Indian interests have to be truly protected, then the writer says that India should not be seen to be excessively involved in the internal affairs of Nepal, particularly through its intelligence agencies, but instead it should focus on the official bilateral ties and strengthen the strong development partnership along with strengthening the people to people relations. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6, which carries out a critical evaluation of the Draft Trafficking in Persons Bill 2021 or the Draft Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Care and Rehabilitation Bill that the government is likely to table in the Parliament in the upcoming monsoon session. Recently, the bill was placed in the public domain for receiving feedback and comments from the public by the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, and the draft bill has even been sent to the Cabinet for approval, post which it could be tabled in the Parliament. This version of the draft bill against human trafficking happens to be the second version of the bill because the previous version was tabled in the Lok Sabha and was even passed in the Lok Sabha in 2018, but it was never brought to the upper house, that is the Rajya Sabha, following serious doubts and concerns that were raised by opposition parties and experts with regard to some of the controversial provisions in the first version of the bill. Reportedly, the government has made some changes and it has brought out the second draft of the bill, and it is likely to be tabled in the Parliament during the upcoming monsoon session. So let's understand what is human trafficking and as well as the provisions of this bill in detail. See, human trafficking is a type of organized crime. Being a transnational organized crime, it has close links with drug trafficking, terrorism, and as well as with money laundering. See, human trafficking refers to the trade of humans for the purpose of forced labor, sexual slavery, or commercial sexual exploitation, where the victims, who are especially women and children, are taken across the country or to foreign countries through force or through coercion, with the intent of selling them to other cartels or gangs, who push these victims into forced labor or into slavery or even into sexual exploitation. There are also cases where humans are trafficked for the purpose of forced marriage, for the sake of extracting organs and for trafficking these human organs, and also for forced surrogacy and other forms of forced labor. So, all these illicit activities where humans are forced to engage in harmful forms of labor and where they are sold against their will is referred to as human trafficking, and it is a type of organized crime. India is one of the most affected countries by human trafficking, as every year thousands of women and children are trafficked both within India and as well as abroad. Human trafficking is quite rampant, not just within India, but also along India's land borders with Nepal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. And human trafficking also takes place from India to feed the trafficking markets in other countries, especially in West Asia, Southeast Asia, and as well as in the United States and Europe. So, this criminal offense is a grave violation of human rights, and its forced and exploitative nature not only leads to the violation of basic rights of the victims, but it could also threaten the country's national security and internal security due to its links with drug trafficking, terrorism, and money laundering. So, to tackle this crime, the government is looking to bring in the Trafficking in Persons Act, and its primary objective is to prevent and counter human trafficking. The draft bill contains provisions that seeks to provide care, protection, and rehabilitation for the victims, with special focus being given to the rights and needs of women and children. It also contains provisions that seek to create a supportive legal, economic, and social environment for the victims in order to protect their rights and ensure their well being. The law, once enacted, will extend to all citizens inside and as well as outside of India. It will cover offences both in India and abroad, and even persons on any ship or aircraft registered in India, wherever it may be, or wherever it may be carrying Indian citizens, or even foreign nationals who are being trafficked on these aircrafts and ships, including a stateless person who has his or her residence in India at the time of commission of the offence, are covered under this Act. The law will apply to every offence of trafficking in persons with cross border implications. This is one of the positive aspects of the bill because trafficking being a cross border offence, it does focus on the cross border implications by extending the coverage to not just Indian citizens but also to foreign nationals and stateless people and to victims who are being trafficked on Indian registered ships and aircrafts. Another important provision of the bill is that it deals with the proceeds of the crime and any property or asset that is acquired through these illegal proceeds of human trafficking can be confiscated and attached to the case. This provision is similar to the provisions with regard to money laundering, where the proceeds of the crime can be confiscated and attached to the ongoing cases. The bill also proposes to establish anti-trafficking committees both at the national and state levels in order to provide for effective implementation of the provisions. The bill proposes stringent penalties and punishments with a minimum jail term of 7 years, which could even extend to life imprisonment and as well as death penalty in case of grave trafficking incidents. Especially if the offence is committed against a child of less than 12 years, or if trafficking leads to repeated rape of a woman, then such offences attracts maximum punishment of life imprisonment and even death penalty if required. Under the bill, the term exploitation has been defined to include exploitation of victims in the form of prostitution. It also extends to sexual exploitation through pornography, any act of physical exploitation, forced labor, slavery, or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or forced removal of organs, illegal clinical drug trials, or even illegal biomedical research. The bill also expands the definition of victims beyond women and children to include transgenders as well, who happen to be one of the biggest victims of human trafficking. Then, more importantly, considering the cross border implications of human trafficking and considering its links with other forms of organized crime and terrorism and money laundering, the bill proposes to provide the NIA or the National Investigation Agency with the jurisdiction to investigate human trafficking incidents, thus highlighting the cross border and security focus of this bill. So, on the account of all these provisions, experts have appreciated the draft bill, and many experts have stated that this is an extremely well thought out draft provision as it shows the government's serious intent to crack down on this serious offense. But at the same time, the draft bill has also generated a lot of criticism from several other experts and activists, and as well as from the opposition parties. Even the editorial points out some of the shortcomings of the bill, even as it praises the government for the positive provisions of the bill. The editorial says that such a bill is welcome and much needed to tackle the offense of human trafficking, but unfortunately, the draft provisions lack the specific nuances and the precision that is needed to tackle a complex crime such as human trafficking. And unfortunately, it provides for wide sweeping provisions which acts like a sledgehammer instead of providing for a more nuanced precision approach, as the bill fails to take into account the finer aspects of human trafficking. See, first and foremost, by giving the NIA jurisdiction to investigate human trafficking cases, the government will not only end up burdening the NIA, which is supposed to deal only with terror related cases, but it will also end up weakening federalism because this would take away the jurisdiction of local law enforcement and it would end up giving a national security angle and a terrorism angle to every human trafficking incident. The next drawback with the bill is that it provides for a very broad definition of victims. It even covers those who are engaged in consensual sexual work and thereby ends up criminalizing sex work and even consensual pornography, And this would end up defeating the very purpose of the bill, which is to tackle forced trafficking. The bill also seeks to make reporting of these offences mandatory, and it proposes very strict punishments and penalties for cases of non reporting. By including this provision, the government seems to ignore the fact that many victims may not be in a position to report the offence due to fear, and it ends up further victimizing the actual victims by treating their hesitance to report these offences as a criminal offence and by providing punishment and penalties for this. Next, even the provision of death penalty is questionable on both ethical and as well as legal grounds. And such a powerful, wide sweeping act could get misused or it could be wrongfully applied, thereby creating more problems and issues than it actually seeks to address. Now, let's take up a column from page number 7, in which the writer evaluates the current economic challenges for India based on an assessment of the 1991 LPG reforms. See, the LPG reforms stands for liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which marked the structural economic reforms that were introduced by the then PV Narasimha Rao government at a time when India was staring at a massive economic crisis triggered by an impending BOP crisis or a balance of payments crisis. In simple terms, balance of payments or BOP is the difference between all the money that is flowing into the country in a particular period of time and the money that is going out of the country to the rest of the world. It essentially consists of two components, the current account and the capital account. Back in 1991, India's balance of payments had hit the negative territory, and it only had enough foreign exchange reserves to sustain hardly another 2 to 3 weeks of imports. The overall crisis in the Indian economy was a result of the lack of competitiveness of the Indian industry, which had been stifled by excessive government control due to socialist era policies of License Raj and Inspector Raj. While the socialist era economic policies initially helped India to trigger growth by promoting large public sector enterprises, it eventually ended up having a downside because the government started controlling all the manners of production through a strict system of licenses and inspections. This excessive government control in the economy had stifled Indian enterprise and eventually pushed the country towards a BOP crisis. At this crucial juncture, the then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, along with his Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, introduced landmark LPG reforms which were designed to reduce government's control over the economy and to liberalize and globalize the Indian economy to open up to international trade and foreign inflows of capital, along with liberalization and privatization of India's domestic production by eliminating the restrictions of the License Raj and Inspector Raj era. The writer says that these landmark economic reforms have no doubt served India really well because after these reforms, India never ever witnessed a BOP crisis again. And today, India has built up a huge war chest of foreign currency reserves, which could help Indian imports sustain itself for more than 1 year. This in itself shows the success and the effectiveness of the LPG reforms that were introduced in 1991, and it definitely triggered massive economic growth in the country. But however, the writer questions whether these reforms have really strengthened the Indian industry and have they really made India's exports competitive, which previously was controlled and regulated entirely by the government. See, while the reforms have led to tremendous growth in the Indian economy, and while it helped India to build up a considerable stockpile of foreign exchange reserves, it is very important to note that most of these reserves today is made up of financial inflows that are coming into the country in the form of FDI, portfolio investment, that is through the FPI route and as well as through the route of remittances. But these reforms alone haven't been sufficient to strengthen Indian exports and they haven't helped India to build an export surplus. Because having a consistent export surplus is one of the best ways to insulate India from any future BOP crisis. Because such financial inflows can stop at any point of time, and especially portfolio investment in the capital markets could flee the Indian economy during a crisis, thereby quickly depleting India's forex reserves. So excessive reliance on financial inflows can never be a permanent long term solution, and the best way to avoid a future BOP crisis would be to strengthen the exports of the country and to build up an export surplus, which could help India register a surplus in the current account. Because a surplus in the capital account is very volatile and it may not guarantee protection against any future crisis. So the writer's argument is that even though the economic reforms strengthened India's forex reserves and boosted India's growth, it hasn't really promoted competitiveness in India's export oriented industry. Even though excessive government control in this regard has come down, it has not been matched with adequate policies to boost Indian exports. The writer says that if export oriented industries have to be promoted, then what we need is strong public private partnership models along with adequate private investment in research and development, which is carefully backed and nurtured by government facilitation. Unfortunately, this support system has been created only for few service based industries such as software exports. That's one reason why Indian software exports have boomed and sustained over the decades, whereas manufacturing industries have struggled to build up their export competitiveness. Even with regard to India's GDP growth, the LPG reforms did act as a catalyst, which helped India register consistent growth from the late 1990s, and especially between 2001 and 2016, India did register phenomenal growth as a result of the LPG reforms, combined with frequent fine tuning of India's economic policies. But following the demonetization exercise, structural problems have crept into the Indian economy, and from 2018 itself, we have started witnessing a structural slowdown in India's GDP growth, which now has been completely disrupted and derailed by the pandemic. So, in many ways, the writer says that the current economic crisis that we are dealing with as a result of the pandemic is similar to the 1991 crisis, because both are unprecedented situations in their own right, and it calls for massive structural economic reforms on the lines of the 1991 reforms. The writer says that the current government needs to initiate such massive structural economic reforms to build up India's competitiveness, especially with regard to exports in the manufacturing sector. And along with these economic policies, the government will also have to focus on the social infrastructure that is needed to strengthen the Indian economy. The pandemic has clearly exposed the gaps in India's social infrastructure, including healthcare, sanitation, and governance. So, bridging this deficit is also equally important, along with the right kind of economic policies which could nurture private investment and facilitate the government's role in boosting India's export competitiveness in order to build a valuable economy that is resilient from any such external shocks in the future. Now, let's look at this article from page number 8. HAL, that is Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, is planning to indigenously design and develop a medium lift helicopter which has been tentatively named as the Indian multi-role helicopter. See, the HAL has already designed one such multi-role helicopter known as the ALH or the Dhruv, which is already being used by various services. To further meet the requirement of the Navy, the Indian Air Force, and the Indian Army for such a medium lift helicopter, the HAL is looking to come up with a brand new multi-role helicopter that would be indigenously designed and developed. In this regard, the Navy has already submitted its requirements for two different variants of this multi-role helicopter, and very soon the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army will also be submitting their specifications. This ambitious project, which is estimated to cost around 10,000 crore rupees for the HAL, will be finalized very soon once the inputs are received from all the three armed forces, and the final recommendation would be submitted to the Cabinet Committee on Security headed by the Prime Minister for the final sanction for the project. Next, according to this article on page number 10, the Supreme Court is considering to limit its role as a policy watchdog as it steps into the domain of the executive. See, as you all know, the Indian Constitution provides for the doctrine of separation of powers, and Article 50 provides for the clear separation of powers between the judiciary and the executive. But time and again, while examining executive decisions and executive policies, the judiciary has often been accused of overreach, which leads to the erosion of separation of powers. For example, recently the Supreme Court had said that it cannot remain a silent spectator when the government's poor management of the pandemic is costing human lives, and the judiciary had directly stepped into the role of a policy watchdog where it was scrutinizing almost every policy decision of the government. But this judicial activism of the Supreme Court is often criticized to be a case of judicial overreach, which steps into the domain of the government. And hence, based on this controversy, the Supreme Court is examining whether it should limit itself and contain its role as a policy watchdog in order to ensure that it doesn't step into the domain of the executive unnecessarily, which could lead to the violation of separation of powers. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: the recent internal developments in Nepal has opened a new chapter in the country's quest for political stability. What lessons does it offer for Indian diplomacy towards Nepal? Examine. The second question: the draft Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Care and Rehabilitation Bill 2021 intends to stamp out exploitative trafficking. Critically discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So, this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.